Hi, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Marissa Kozlov. Welcome to today's eMarketer Tech Talk webinar, where we host guest speakers from all areas of media, ad tech, and MarTech. We have a great show ahead for you today with two great presenters, and we're going to learn more about how brands can create engaging, personalized moments across every interaction with first-party data. So before we get to all of that great content, let me introduce you to my two guests. First, we have John Nash, Chief Marketing and Strategy Officer at Redpoint Global. John, great to have you back with us today.
Hey, Marissa, good to see you as well.
Good to see you too. And we also have Jerry Murray, Research Director of Marketing and Sales Technology at the IDC. Jerry, nice to see you.
Hi, Marissa. Great to be back with you guys.
Well, I'm so excited for today, and I know this is going to be a great show for our audience. So I'd like to encourage our audience to please think about any questions that are on your mind. John and Jerry will be here in the second part of today's show to answer any questions that you have. So just submit any questions through that chat window on the right side of your screen. And as always, I will do my best to get to as many as possible. So it is now time to get started. John, passing it to you.
Great. Thanks, Marissa. Yeah, I've spent my career helping brands take first-party data and create it into really create revenue from it. So I've done that at Accenture. I led the customer insight practice on a global basis there. I lead marketing and strategy at Redpoint. We're a software company. So we have software that helps you as brands not only perfect your first-party data, but in that single customer view, but also perfect your customer experience, however you might define that. But typically our customer experiences are becoming more personalized, highly automated. And to do that, you need the right capabilities. That's where our software comes in terms of helping you form that golden record and automate next best actions and really deliver a consistent omnichannel orchestrated experience. So I'll get into some of that, and I'll get into some of our client success stories here a little bit later. But for now, I wanted to turn it over to Jerry. Hey, Jerry.
Hey, John, thank you very much. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining. We're going to talk a little bit about the exciting transition into first-party data strategies for customer experience. It's really the path for getting greater trust, loyalty, profitability, and lifetime value out of your customer relationships. So I think all of this is a really good opportunity for marketers to think about re-engineering some of their stack, but at the same time, thinking about new practices that in ways they can differentiate customer relationships based on first-party data. So it's a kind of a long agenda to get through in 20 minutes. We'll talk about some of these things in more detail, maybe in the Q&A. But I just want to walk through the prioritization of customer experience, some of the innovation that's going on, and how CDPs in particular are a critical part of the new infrastructure and architecture required to do and manage customer experience across the whole front office, not just within a single department such as marketing. And then we'll talk about some of the things that marketers should think about with respect to all this new technology. What kind of new things can you do for your customers? So first of all, I think we're all aware, and most surveys these days we see from every source is prioritizing customer experience, right? Customers themselves are telling us that it's becoming as important as the product and or the service. They're telling us that it has a great influence on the brands that they're choosing. How good was the experience in terms of discovering, acquiring, using, and supporting a particular product or service. And enterprises are responding accordingly, right? They're making it a key priority. And the survey work that we've done over the last couple of years confirms all of that. First of all, what's interesting about the consumer point of view is that not only are they very sensitive and scrutinizing the experiences that they're having with your brands, and that includes the product, service, the whole digital experience, the before, during, and after the purchase process. And all throughout that whole course of interactions, which might span multiple channels in marketing, an e-commerce site visit, some sales interaction, maybe some interaction with the support team and your finance team, your billing group. Through all those interactions, customers are looking for high levels of personalization and privacy at the same time, not willing to sacrifice one for the other. And that's got to be consistent across all the interactions that you conduct with your customers. And as a result, it's not a departmental problem. You can't solve this through departmental incremental investments in IT at a departmental level. You got to really think about it in terms of an enterprise capability. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. accordingly, as we just noted earlier, enterprises and senior executives are responding accordingly. When we do our large economic enterprise resiliency studies, which are global studies of several thousand respondents around the world, last year we saw the stack ranking, profit growth was number one, and customer experience was actually down at the bottom of the stack. And a year later, in February 2022, we're seeing the inverse. The customer experience and customer satisfaction have become key priorities for executives. And this is actually a common, I think, a strategic insight in many respects from the executive team, because the fact of the matter is customer experience drives all these other things. It drives the trust and loyalty and profitability and revenue growth of the business. So why not just make that the center tent pole around which all of the front office functions are going to organize and collaborate? So there's a strategic priority at the highest levels of most organizations these days to emphasize customer experience and satisfaction, and a realization that the data layer is a critical part of that. As we talked about, as I mentioned earlier, the customer experience capabilities of your organization is going to increasingly drive all those important business performance outcomes. 34% of our respondents are telling us that better customer experience results in higher profits, better brand reputation, higher loyalty, et cetera, et cetera. It's all goodness up and down the stack in terms of the kinds of things that customer experience leaders are experiencing in terms of business improvements. Another curious finding that we've had over the past survey efforts that we've done is this idea that how much data do brands collect about customers at what stage of the relationship? And on the one hand here, you can see that brands are telling us that they collect most of their information in the customer support and sales and renewal processes, right? Like after you become a customer. And that makes a lot of sense. That's when you have the deeper relationships. You've got lots of conversations, interactions going on, and you're collecting lots and lots of information. But in terms of the value of that information, in terms of decision-making and customer acquisition processes, it turns out to be almost inverse, right? So the kind of the weak signals that you might get in your advertising and marketing and customer acquisition parts of the process are actually extremely important to making the right decisions about, well, who do we want to bring on as a customer? How much do we want to invest in creating that customer and or that account for our business? And we can't just use marketing data to optimize those decisions. We've got to be able to look at the sales data, the commerce data, and more importantly, how do these relationships perform over time? Do we get paid on time? Do these people overconsume, or folks with certain kinds of attributes of their corporate environment or their personal behavioral attributes, do they look like folks who are going to overconsume support resources? Or are they going to be accounts and relationships in which, we don't really hear from them unless they want to buy more stuff from us, which is kind of like the ideal situation. So an interesting idea about the concept of first-party data here, because we want to move from the challenge of moving from unknown to known, and from knitting together all of these different devices and touch points into a single identity so that we can serve that customer effectively as they move around from all these different touch points. So key insight and key challenge here with respect to the difference between where do we get most of the information about our customers versus which is most valuable in terms of driving the business and achieving those goals of profitability, trust, loyalty, and customer lifetime value. And one of the challenges, I think, with respect to the data infrastructure is that very often the data gets disconnected from the customer journey. So as most of us, especially those in marketing, are familiar with the concept of the buyer's journey or the customer experience. And we've been mapping that around the front office. So we've got a customer that has come to our, responding to an email, they end up on our e-commerce site, they might throw some items into a cart, which they may or may not buy online. They might pop into one of our stores and buy those items from our store and not empty out their cart. Meanwhile, they have a problem with one of the products. They're talking to support about it, and the clock is ticking, and marketing is just about to start sending them out the abandoned cart emails. And they're still working with finance to dispute the bill, and all of a sudden they're getting the email from marketing saying, hey, happy customer, buy more stuff from us. And that sort of throws salt into the wounds of what turned out to be, or at the moment, was a bad customer experience. If we might be able to recover it. But if we can't share all that signaling, all those attributes that we're collecting from these different departments during customer interactions, it gets very difficult to avoid embarrassing ourselves or doing even something worse in front of our customers. And you have to think about, every interaction that you have with your customer, you are teaching your customer something about your brand. Something might be great. These are the new products we have, new prices we have, new services we can offer, all these things we can do to help you achieve what you're aspiring to achieve in your life and in your professional career. On the other hand, we can sometimes get in our own way, right? And so we have to be much more coordinated around the idea of customer-centric design for each of these functions and the use cases and interactions that they're supporting for our customers. That requires different thinking in terms of how we put together our information systems that support all that work. Now, in the past, particularly in marketing, in the last decade or so, we've seen an explosion of hundreds of solutions and thousands of vendors, providers, trying to deliver those capabilities into our marketing stacks. And it's extremely complicated. And that is replicated around all of these front office functions. There's legacy technology, there's new technology in place, but it's all been kind of specified and operated as a departmental system, as opposed to one that is based on a kind of connective set of shared services that all of the applications are going to share. So the challenge is, how do we take this big infrastructure that's really been built from the application layer down, from the task automation layer down into the infrastructure, how do we make it look like and operate like we built it from the data layer up? Because that's the key thing for customers. Your data is your most customer-centric asset. And if you can share that across all these functions, they will all naturally become much more customer-centric. But there's a lot of challenges, right? Because we have multiple systems and multiple data formats and schemas running around all over our enterprises. And that makes the whole aggregation process difficult. Now, that's what the core function of a CDP is. And on top of that, most CDPs also do some work in terms of identity resolution and bringing in events and signals from all these different applications and adding them to the customer record to drive decision-making. And many of them also then have analytics and AI platforms built on top of that to facilitate segmentation and personalization recommendations and those kinds of things, and so on up the stack. And how much of there are many different kinds of CDPs, some of which really just concentrate on that base layer of data integration and quality management. And others have full stack capabilities, even to the point of potentially supporting some engagement capabilities and interaction capabilities, sending out messages to customers. And which kind of CDP you need, it's going to depend on really the maturity and the rationality of your various technology stacks. So if it's an environment where you've got many systems already doing all this work, well, you might want to just start at the base layer, but then eventually, we want to try to avoid or kind of eliminate all of the fragmentation that we have inherited from the application layer of the stack in the analytics and data layer by consolidating that on a single set of services. And the CDP is a great solution for achieving this architectural change. We're basically taking these departmental stacks, turning them on their sides, and taking these workloads that are kind of baked into each of these solutions for data and analytics, reporting and calendaring and scheduling, all that kind of stuff, redundantly all over the enterprise, and consolidating that into a shared service environment. One of the other great things about the CDP is that it can serve roles across that whole front office at the top of the architecture, but it can also serve all the various analytical and technical functions up and down the stack. So we did this big study last year of 24 leading CDP vendors. And that study, I think we had 105 or 10 questions in there with 725 multiple choice answers. So it was a pretty deep analysis. And one of the questions we asked in that process was, what kind of users, what kind of roles are users logging into your CDP? And we asked about these approximately 10, I think it's 10 roles here. And as you can see, collectively, it's interesting that there was just about a 50-50 split between what we would consider technical users, those who are in IT and privacy and data ops and science, as well as more technical marketing ops type of users, and those that are more kind of staffing, front office staff users. Obviously, marketing is a big kind of the big beachhead where most CDPs land in many organizations, but we're increasingly seeing those systems connected to customer experience and loyalty and customer service and those downstream functions that also conduct and support key interactions with customers. So it's a nice 50-50 split. Again, CDPs kind of vary all over the map here in terms of some are very heavily weighted towards the technical user base and some are very heavily weighted toward front office. Redpoint, interestingly enough, looks almost exactly like this chart, kind of even Steven supporting all roles around up and down the stack and across front office functions. So just another interesting thing to keep in mind. And as you're thinking about how do you solve that architectural issue, if you're thinking about building it yourself or looking at different commercial solutions for this, keep in mind the architectural issues, the user base, as well as some of the criteria about your particular market, your markets and the vertical industry you're in, and the size of your company. As we've looked at the CDP deployments, when there's a good fit amongst those various dimensions of the decision-making for the CDP and the customer, it turns out these things pay back or start paying back very quickly in the first 3 months or so. In front office functions, there's many, say, hundreds of different specific use cases like pricing personalization, offer personalization, churn analysis, customer loyalty analysis, and that sort of thing. And those are applications that are and use cases that exist across multiple front office functions, but much of it is based on these 5 kind of core functions of the CDP, which is real-time personalization, orchestrating the journey across all those different touch points, which is like just a key part of the ability to do customer experience management, as well as the segmentation capabilities. And as we mentioned earlier, some can even do campaign execution and measurement. And then in the data and operations side of the user base, of the user community, they're really working on that customer 360 data integration and aggregation processes, making sure the data is compliant and is high quality, and doing the identity resolution work. So there's a lot of analytics and AI that are applied to what data comes in, how do you analyze the quality of the data, how do we stitch together, and what methods do we use to stitch together different kinds of signals to create a single identity across different channels and device inputs from individual customers. In any case, while all that work being facilitated by the CDP results in very fast business benefits within the first quarter, first 3 months. And then just as a quick example, and John will go into more detail on some of these in his own examples as well, but just in terms of the front office, it's kind of 3 big parts of the front office functions with respect to customer experience: marketing, commerce, and the CX loyalty and support functions. These are 7 or so different businesses, and you can see a wide range of benefits, all with fairly significant improvements, ranging from revenue from search and conversion rates in marketing to conversion rates on e-commerce, cart size, increasing cart size, reducing cart abandonment behavior, and in loyalty, increasing customer lifetime value, seeing much greater set of capability to upsell and cross-sell products and solutions. So there's a lot of proven success with respect to the CDP. And I think it's an incredibly versatile asset with respect to the infrastructure needed to actually manage customer experience. So with all that said, I'm just going to wrap up with a couple of minutes of recommendations for how, if we're going to have all this new technology and all this new data and a lot of new expectations from our customer base, we need to incorporate that into how we think about the role of marketing in between our buyers and our brand, right? We're really an intermediary between in that conversation between the buyer and the brand. But there's a lot of changes going on on both sides of that conversation. And marketing in particular, I think, needs to start thinking a little differently about its particular role. For instance, the architecture, we can't have these departmental stacks working as kind of isolated islands of automation. We've got to bring them together. We've got to think about this customer experience orchestration services oriented architecture. We can start in a department, but we've got to have a roadmap of use cases that's going to rapidly expand the scope and scale of that capability across our whole front office. That, by the way, tends to be the biggest challenge in the DIY department. I think a lot of companies with sophisticated IT resources think, we can just cobble this together with a couple of different infrastructure resources. But the fact of the matter is, supporting that expansive set of use cases and running, working with real-time millisecond type responses on one end of the front end of marketing, and then other more complicated, deeper, kind of batch or periodic interactions with other parts of the business, make it difficult for the IT team to truly cover and support all of that. The data ecosystem has got to become connected and fast. We've got to define our customer journeys, not just about the external touch points that the customer is going through with respect to our digital properties, but we've got to map the internal data journey and make sure that the data is moving around within brand and regulatory policy and governance so that it keeps up with the customer. Our workflows have got to be, in marketing, we spend a decade solving for context and zero moment interactions. Now we've got to really start solving for continuity, not just across channels and marketing, but across the whole front office, all of those interactions. Every interaction across the front office should enable and enhance every other interaction. And when we're defining our use cases, we really want to think about connectivity as a key criteria and attribute. What are we contributing to that enterprise customer data asset, and what are we consuming out of it to make better decisions and possibly even offer new services to our customers? So in the end, I think the big takeaways are, let's think about continuity as the kind of fundamental design parameter for customer experience management. It's based on connected use cases, and it literally requires the data and analytics infrastructure to be architected as an enterprise service, to the point where I would make the argument that your data infrastructure is your brand. It's that influential in terms of the customer experience. And lastly, as you're adopting all this new technology and new capabilities, don't just use it to do the same old marketing better, faster, cheaper. Innovate, think differently about how you can utilize that data to deliver more content and more value on a very personalized level to all of your customers. And with that, I am going to turn it back over to John, and we will move on with the next section of our presentation.
Thanks, Jerry. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Your data infrastructure is your brand. And I love your mindset shifts around connected data, connected use cases, connected experiences, and ultimately the CXOS that you outlined. So, where we come in is providing the capabilities to help do that. And there's a 5-step process that we go through with most of our clients to get the right capabilities in place. And with that, at a high level, these steps are fairly basic. There's a lot of engineering we put in our software to make them easy to do, even though it's a very complex thing to get this really strong golden record and have your data infrastructure be as consistent as your brand is and as powerful as your brand is. But the 5 steps are connecting all your data, all of it, forging a golden record of each individual consumer, pinpointing the next best actions for them, intelligently orchestrating that across all the interactions, which is another thing you mentioned, Jerry, and then ultimately delivering the compelling marketing moment, and doing that in a way that you're measuring and reporting at the individual consumer level and individual offer and context and content, so that you can learn and optimize over time. And so we stitch this stuff together in a way that it creates this CXOS. It's a good name for it. It's based on software that we've perfected over time across a number of industries. I'll go through a couple of case examples here in a few minutes. But at the base level, it's this customer data management layer, being able to actually bring every source of data together and it could be first-party data plus second, third-party streaming batch data. So you've got this really accurate golden record, and it's got all the information about the consumer in it. You from that do automated machine learning to generate the next best offer, action, or message. So you can't hope to personalize an experience without the data. You can't hope to personalize it at a one-to-one level without the automation of the machine learning. So ultimately, you get recommendations and actions at the speed of the customer that then get orchestrated in an intelligent way so that you're delivering a consistent experience across all touch points in real time ultimately. And we've formed an open garden approach and an API layer that you can leave all of those touch points in all your existing last miles in place. So there's no need to rip and replace. This is basically foundational capabilities that goes across your existing data sources and across your existing touch points to give you ultimately that single point of control over both your data and operations. So you can create those perfect customer experiences, again, however you define them and however consumer behaviors might change over time. Here's one example where we did this with a global retailer. They had their use case was around creating a consistent, highly personalized experience across the channels, no matter where the consumer was or when they showed up. So consistent experience across website, in-store, mobile apps. They integrated 50 different sources of data, including things like web behavior data, returns data, certainly point of sale data at detailed product level. They were able to create this single customer view, and we helped them do it at a compressed time frame. Where they took 99% of the time out of it, informed the golden record, and within a 5-minute window, all data sources were updated into that golden record. You could do this as fast as your customer cadence. Certainly, there's a lot of data that gets updated in real time. They had data that sometimes took days or even a week before it really got updated and got back to the marketing processes. So we squished that down to a 5-minute window. All the data comes in and is integrated and attached to that consumer within a 5-minute window, which allowed them to do some really interesting things around, when we went into this buy online, pick up in store, as that became a more prevalent consumer behavior. When you get into things like cart abandonment or partial cart abandonment, where they might partially abandon something and they're on their way to pick up what they did order, you could message them through your app or email or text message with another offer. So if they bought a drill and they're going to pick it up, but they left behind the drill bits, that was in the cadence of the customer message to them. Similarly, we didn't offer them promotions or discounts on things like a drill if they already bought it. So this getting the data accurate in real time is really critical for any consumer experience today, but it's also very difficult for marketers to do. So one of the ways we do that starts with this unique golden record. And Jerry, you highlighted a lot of the CDP functional capabilities required. There's some really nuances I'd encourage you to look at. We do some things different that are really important to driving the value, including in this formation of the golden record. And we take all incoming streaming data and batch data. There's no latency from ingestion to activation. There's not a 24-hour process or something like that around ingestion. We put the identifiers together, match them in real time. You've got all the historical aggregations done. It's all compliant. There's two key things that are important to this. At the bottom here is this real-time identity layer. So being able to identify consumers and resolve them across different devices, across different identifiers. So they might be using email addresses and identifier in one place, or an account number, or a name and address in another. Being able to stitch all that together, especially when it comes to the complexity of first-party data, is a key thing that we do in a very precise way and a very scalable way. So you get this 360-degree view of customer. We do both heuristic matching and probabilistic matching, because there's things, misspellings and all kinds of other interesting things that can happen that can mess up data that should be matched, or you might overmatch. And we're very good at getting that match really tight. We also have at the top a real-time aggregation layer. So as this data is taken in, we'll roll it up into any calculations you have. So time, if you trigger offers based on different aggregations you do, time since last purchase, or total value purchased, or total lifetime value, whatever the aggregation might be, we can update those aggregations in real time according to your definition, and which are, again, obviously great for triggering then the next best action. So you end up with this golden record that takes in all the data. It has a full identity graph, a long tail of attributes about the consumer, all the aggregations, And I also can't emphasize this enough of having this long tail of attributes. You don't want a lot of people can do a short tail in real time, but ultimately as a marketer, we want to take everything we know about the consumer and use that to market to them. Another part of the automated machine learning capabilities to really focus on is not only model building and machine learning, which we do, but model deployment. And we do model deployment seamlessly, so you can build models into your campaigns, into your customer journey flows. There's no delay between when a data scientist might build a model and getting that into production, which in some cases might be weeks or certainly days for a lot of companies. You can do that as soon as the model is built. The marketers actually have control over it too. So they can manage this fleet of models that can be tuned to their goals, whether it's time spent on page or conversion rates or whatever the metrics are you're trying to optimize against. You as a marketer can manage your fleet of machine learning models. And so it's fundamentally marketer controlled, which is a great capability set that we have. We also do a rich set of orchestration capabilities. And I'll point out some of the operational characteristics. We have 150 different pre-built connectors to existing MarTech capabilities or your last miles to the customer. We've abstracted that layer, so we've future-proofed it. Ultimately, there's always going to be the next best social channel or the next best device that's going to come on, or IoT devices. You can integrate any of that while also having organic cohesion. So we really seamlessly fuse together one platform to do inbound and outbound orchestration. You don't have multiple decision engines out there that are conflicting with one another. And then it's very precise. We use all of that long record in the consumer data. It's a closed loop. So you take all those behavior and response data and perfect it over time in an automated basis. So you can really scale your operations to a very granular one-to-one marketing without scaling operation resources up. And we also do it in the customer cadence, which there are some, outbound batch or real-time inbound across synchronous channels, which consumers are more and more using multiple real-time channels to engage with the consumer with the brand across different stages. So those are some of the key kind of characteristics you should look for in your capabilities. Another client of ours, Xanterra, is really doing some advanced and ambitious marketing around these capabilities. So they've got 100 different data sources they put together across multiple brands. If you're not familiar with Xanterra, they run all of the lodging for the U.S. National parks. They also have a bunch of adventure services that are branded differently. And they bring that together, though, into a holistic experience for consumers. And they've got really very granular views of their segmentation, the personas. They also take a look across pre-visit, visit, and post-visit journeys, which is something that retailers should learn from, or healthcare. And they've done it in a way that they were able to generate 150% plus revenue growth in some of their properties, while also reducing the interaction costs. So they shifted things to lower cost channels. They were able to eliminate non-value added interactions. So you can really have it both ways as a marketer. You can drive higher revenue at a reduced cost base. And part of it is also the platform enabling you to do things really in a precise way, and enabling the people to spend their talent on the important things, like a data scientist spending time on the models instead of the data, and a marketer spending time on the campaigns and the creativity instead of stitching everything together. So some strong results from Xanterra. They leverage our open garden approach, which I mentioned around leaving last miles. We also have the capability to leave your customer data in place behind your own firewall if you choose to do that, or in a private cloud or hybrid situation, or we can host it. So we also open up a wealth of opportunities for where you want your customer data to be stored, unlike many options that are in the market today, where you're restricted to being behind their firewalls. Just a couple more case examples, and then I think we'll turn it over to Q&A. But I want to mention healthcare. We're doing some really interesting things with Lucerne Health. They're bridging value-based care, both providers and payers, bringing them together to really focus on outcomes. And they only get, in value-based care, you only get paid based on positive patient outcomes. So they want to improve outcomes at a lower cost. We've been able to help them do that, and do that with the end providers and payers. One example is a 50% increase in appointments scheduled for closing care gaps. So these are things like diagnostic procedures that you might be age-based and doing a personalized outreach to get those scheduled. And they do personalization based on you as a consumer, which type of doctor you'd like to engage with, whether it's a male or female, what your location is, what the operational capacity at that location is. And they match all this stuff together and deliver a very personalized experience, both in email, call center outreach, mailings, that it's very coordinated process. And because of that, they've got this 50% increase in appointment schedule, which is huge for helping to prevent illnesses and deliver better outcomes. And the last one I'll go through is a CPG company where we integrated 25 different data sources, 300 different attributes, really got a deep understanding of those consumers. From that, they did real-time recommendations on their websites for product conversions, 79% lift in that, 3x ROI in the first year. So these are strong ROI capabilities. They were able to integrate not only things, the first party data around transactional data and basic customer information, but they also integrated preferences and through survey information or real-time interactive ways to get at intent and preferences. So ultimately, as marketers, we want to meet the consumer where they are in their moment and whatever their intent is. So all this data and being able to have really this robust golden record are critical to all of that. So with that, I'll page here to them. They have some other stories here we don't have time for, but you can always go out to redpointglobal.com and look at our customer stories. There's some really interesting things in there. But for now, I wanted to save some time for questions. So Marissa, back over to you.
Thank you, John. Wow, what a fantastic presentation from both of you. So much great information. Just a reminder for our audience, you will be getting a link to today's recording, so you'll be able to access, again, all of that great data. And of course, those really great case studies you shared. So thank you both. And we have a lot of questions, which is awesome. So let's get right to that. The first question, Jerry, I'm going to pass this one to you. Why would marketers want a CDP instead of some other way of bringing the data together, like a customer data warehouse or a data lake? What do you think?
Yeah, I think marketers have had data lakes and warehouses, and companies have had them for more over a decade, really. And there are some big limitations to those systems. Most of them are not really fully capable of supporting real-time analytics and millisecond kind of response times that you see, particularly in marketing, where we have an expansive, explosion in the scope of the kind of millions or tens of millions of interactions that we're supposed to try to support, and a huge shrinking of the window. Between a click and a screen refresh, we're supposed to be supporting all of these millisecond recommendations and personalization processes for our potential customers and prospects. And the typical data lake does not do a good job of responding to that kind of workload demand at scale, right? So I think that's number one. Number two, I think, is the idea that the customer data platform value proposition is really, again, it's all about integrating the data and stamping out lag and then sharing it, creating a enterprise service. We want to think of customer data as an enterprise service. And the CDP seems to be a much more modern approach, taking advantage of all the distributed data management capabilities and platforms that are out there in the world to accelerate both the scope and scale that these systems can support for the business.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing that perspective on why CDPs are beneficial. John, I'm going to pass the next one to you. It's about getting organized. How do I get control over all of my data when the data itself is in a state of flux as we keep adding new consumer channels and new data sources?
It's a great question. I think having the right foundation in place is key. And I think identifying your use cases, as Jerry went through, I would identify your high value use cases. What data do you need to drive those use cases? But then put in the foundation, this golden record or customer data management capability set, such that you can add and append data over time, depending as your use cases expand or as the channels expand and the information you collect on consumers expand. So I can't overemphasize enough, I guess, getting that foundation in place of having a customer data management system that's able to build that real-time golden record that is really built for having a long tail of attributes attached to it.
Okay, well, those are helpful strategies. I'm sure it can be very overwhelming when there's so much data and information and figuring out, what to do first. So thank you. The next question, who should be responsible for customer experience within the organization? Jerry?
That's a huge topic of debate, and I think different companies have different answers to that question. A lot of it depends on what kind of a company are you. Particularly B2C companies that are much more doing a much broader scale customer acquisition processes. It tends to be more front office or front of relationship oriented towards marketing. When you're in financial services, healthcare, insurance, other kinds of businesses where there's a very heavy lift in terms of supporting the customer once they become a client. Those customer service functions, as we showed earlier in one of the slides, they're gathering enormous amount of information about the client. And as a result, some of the customer experience leadership teams can be centered towards the post-customer, post-transaction functions in the business. And then the third option really is to have a separate independent customer experience team that's kind of a collection of leadership from all of those front office functions. That works best when there is a contributory budgeting commitment from each of those front office functions, which, by the way, we are big advocates of. We really think that a lot of the fragmentation that is present in all the front office functions and the fragmentation that results in the customer experience really is rooted in the departmental budgeting process. So if you can have a contributory model where each of the functions is paying in for the systems and the data resources and all the work and that's going on in terms of implementing something like a CDP and supporting all the expansive set of use cases that it can serve, then you have actually then some shared metrics. Then I think you have a really solid beginning and structure for building out a reliable, sustainable end-to-end customer experience management capability.
All right, thank you. Ownership is not always an easy answer or a straight path. So thank you for sharing that. You also had a great slide as part of your portion of today's presentation on the organization and the front office. So just as a reminder, our viewers will all have access to that following today's session. Jerry, the next question is also for you. What are marketers missing when it comes to first-party data and CDPs? Are there gaps in first-party data collection?
Well, I think that's, yeah, I think the answer is yes. There are gaps in first-party data collection, and those gaps really, again, vary based on the kind of business that you're in. If you have a direct customer, if you're selling any kind of electronic or smart product, whether it's a treadmill or a computer or a smartphone or whatever piece of software, you can have a very detailed knowledge of how those products are used. In other cases, if you're a CPG company and you just sell exclusively through distribution and retailers that you don't have a direct consumer relationship, boy, first-party data is now going to be a big challenge. You've got to figure out, how do we, not disrupt our retailer relationships, but at the same time develop direct-to-consumer relationships. That's a big challenge, and I think there's different companies have got to be fairly realistic with respect to where are they in that scale, the spectrum of direct contact with the customer and how much the products can actually inform and provide visibility into their behavior and satisfaction and usage of the products, and where you're not. And so you got to kind of develop these first-party acquisition strategies accordingly. And the further away you are from the customer, the more creative you're going to have to be, and the more you're going to have to rely on potentially other second-party sources and relationships in terms of getting some insights into first-party data. I will say, however, that it's very clear that one of the things that first-party data does, and especially zero-party data, the data you get declaratively from your customers as opposed to kind of scraping from their various digital fingerprints, that when the more of that kind of data you use, that you activate your interactions with the customer, the higher levels of trust and relevancy and conversion rates and engagement rates you're going to get from your customers. So I think there's a good practice that marketers in particular can start to think about in terms of measuring their customer data set. Like how much zero, first, second, third, and end party data is actually in the database. And then at the use case level, do the same analysis. At different use cases, how much zero, first, and end party data are we using to support this particular decision for this particular customer? And that will show you, I think, expose a lot of the places where you are missing first party data. It also might help you identify, well, these are the new attributes that we want to gather from the customer. How are we going to do that? How are we going to weave some of those request moments into our buyer's journey and the full customer experience, and hopefully do so in a way that's explanatory and transparent so that the customer feels like they are having those high levels of privacy and personalization with you at all times.
Thank you so much for that. Great answer. We have time for one more question today. John, I'm going to pass this one over to you. How do you overcome legal's resistance around first-party data and the increasing compliance issues related to that? Legal is one of our biggest barriers to using data better.
Yeah, well, certainly you want to be privacy compliant and do things within the legal guardrails. But the thing that I've seen that's key is to offer something of value to the consumers. We've done some research, and consumers are willing to give you information, provided you're giving them a personalized experience or something of value, better content, something better in their context or more relevant messages to them. They're willing to do that. So make it of value to them. Certainly, we've worked with companies that have, particularly around the survey information and getting at some of those deeper preferences and intents. Consumers are willing to give it up because they see some of those, especially real-time recommendations, are spot on for them. So I think the value is critical there. It's also critical to do your identity matching in a really privacy compliant way, ultimately have your own matching capabilities instead of relying on third-party cookies or other things that are going to be going away, or third-party vendors that it might have keys that are going to go away because of legal constraints. So that identity resolution is a key part. And I think Jerry mentioned a lot of great first-party sources that you could stitch together. But you really should be also make sure you've got robust matching capabilities, because you might get like a product registration card and get name and address, but something else might totally come in on an email with an email attached, or who knows what identifier, as consumers are using all kinds of different devices and channels these days. So those are some of the things I would address that question with.
Thank you. Great.
Marissa, if I could just add quickly to that.
Sure. Yeah.
Particularly as from the front office community, when we talk to the chief privacy office, the data governance office, the data strategy office, and up and down the chain of that data organization, it's very clear that they're aware that the value of their work in terms of bringing the data together, making, applying the privacy and compliance regime that they need to, and creating a safe data set for operational users. It's very clear to them that the closer that their data set gets to customer experience use cases, the more valuable it is to the enterprise. And they have a much better economic proposition to make to senior management about the value of their work and the expansion of their team and all that sort of thing. So I think there's an opportunity here for, what may have in the past been some sort of kind of confrontational relationships, or, relationships where there's a sense of inhibition on both sides of the fence, to actually come together and say, look, we all have a vested interest in creating a safe operational data set for everybody in the organization to use, so that the compliance and the legal and regulatory functions of the business are good with that, and that the front office functions can feel like they can operate in a safe environment without having too much concern about the data that they're using to make their decisions. And so I think it's an important thing to start to think about. There is a mutual interest on both sides, under the covers here. So try to get out from under, the confrontations and limitations that are in place, and, come up with some creative answers, because, sometimes those constraints are things that actually inspire out of the box thinking, and you can come up with some really innovative solutions for how to put that data set together, how to work more collaboratively with each other, and potentially even add some metrics to each other's performance evaluation, so that you move towards more of a customer-centric point of view, so that marketing can do its personalization and legal can do its privacy compliance protection. So
Well, thank you both so
Those
much.
have to go hand in glove according to the consumers.
Yeah. Well, those are some great strategies to overcome those challenges of legal and some other challenges internally. So thank you so much, both of you, John and Jerry, for being with us today, for sharing so much fantastic information, and of course, for answering all of those questions from our audience. It was great to be with both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks again. Always a pleasure, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. So just before we wrap up, hang tight for a second. I'm going to just share a few things happening across our channels here. So first, eMarketer will be in Cannes. So if you will be there, please send me a note so my colleagues and I can meet up with you while we're there. We'd love to see you. In addition, we have a lot of great webinars ahead. So you can sign up for analyst or tech talk webinars at emarketer.com/webinars. Don't forget to take a listen to our daily podcast called Behind the Numbers. And of course, we have a variety of newsletters that are excellent. So please do sign up for those. Keep an eye on your email. As I mentioned, you'll be receiving a link to today's recording. And let me thank you again. Thanks to our audience and thanks to John and Jerry and the entire team at Redpoint Global. We'll see you all on the next Tech Talk.